Okay, this tutorial is part of the ultimate stretching strength routine, and I've got the PDF file which is available for download. Alright, so I'll just go through this. I mean, you can read through it yourself, but it really requires a bigger picture scenario, and it requires what you call periodization of the particular training. So it depends where you're at with your training to how you apply this particular system. So I've got here suggested weights workout to support the hyperbolic stretching routine, and again you can download the hyperbolic stretch routine. It's available online, but it's just a extension of the system that we've used for years anyhow. So, but I found it was quite well put together. So this is my additional version to it all. Okay, so this is if you're applying it in a one overall routine, weights routine. I do one once a week, and if your focus is on martial arts training, then that's the main focus, and this is just the support backup. So you're not doing bodybuilding or anything, you're actually doing this training to increase your enduro strength in the flexibility dimension, so that you can hold the kicks in position, that you can have more explosive power through the tendon connections, and you reset the neurotransmitters in the mind-muscle connection. Now I'll go into that in a little bit more detail down the pages. So this is my personal routine. You can adjust it to whatever you like. However, my advice is that you basically stick to this unless you're an experienced trainer and understand the bigger dimension. Okay, so I start off 20 minutes on the step machine, and those step machines I've got switched up to very hard, like as if you're actually running up a set of stairs. So that's what it feels like. It's not on the light settings. For instance, I use the 9500 series Life Fitness stepper, and I'll put that on 95k, even though I'm not 95k, but I whack it up to 95k, 20 minutes, and I do a level 3. It goes from level 3 to 10. Level 1's extremely hard, 2 is pretty hard, 3 is, you really got to sort of let me say, the resistance on doing the full step is level 3. So level 1's the hardest, so level 10's the easiest, and so I put it on about a level 3. So I just take the edge off it a bit. Okay, you do 20 minutes on that to warm the system up. You get the so-called cardio system going, but when people talk about cardio, most of the times they don't know what they're talking about, because I don't say that in an arrogant sense, but there's all the systems are operating at once. So you've got your anaerobic and your aerobic system. So your anaerobic system is basically your chemical system that doesn't need oxygen, that supplies the mitochondria in your muscles, the mitochondria being the engine. It looks like a little cigar actually on the microscope, and it's got all these channels in it, and what it actually produces is endosine triphosphate. So the endosine triphosphate is your energy molecule, and that energy triphosphate is supplied to all the muscles in the body, and that's what actually keeps your muscles working. Now during, say for instance, I'll give you an example. I've got a whole section written on this in Healy's health.com, discussing all the different energy levels and when they cut in and when they don't cut in. So basically, if you were, for instance, running along a road, just to explain it, if you're running along a road or a treadmill at a steady pace, moderate. So your perceived intensity in your mind is, this is not too hard, so you're just plodding along. That would more likely be 70% aerobic. In other words, the lactic acid that's building up in your bloodstream can be metabolized by the system, and the system being your blood flowing through the arteries and veins and what have you, so, and the muscles. So, but then if you were to, you're running along lightly, then you come across a big set of stairs and you have to run up those set of stairs. Well, the aerobic system goes out the door, and what happens is that your body relies on its chemical reserves that don't, or the anaerobic system that doesn't need oxygen. Right, so the so-called aerobics, when they say, oh yeah, they're doing aerobics, well, really it's a mixture of both. And if you're sprinting, you're not using aerobics. Like, for instance, a 100-yard sprinter can sprint the whole 100 yards, you know, on one breath. So you need to be breathing for an aerobic exercise, so they just use pure chemical. And when you have a look at the legs, for instance, on a sprint athlete, he's got these huge legs, and what happens there is in those muscles they build up what they call lactic acid tolerance levels. So in other words, the chemical byproduct of both aerobic and anaerobic exercise is lactic acid, and that's what shuts your muscles down. But in the case of the sprinter, their muscles adapt so that they can tolerate more lactic acid than the normal person. So that's how you train your system to be able to tolerate bigger and bigger levels of lactic acid, and that all is directly proportionate to what sort of training you're doing. So in other words, if you train just plodding along, going for a walk, well, that's great. You know, I'm just giving an illustration here. Well, your system adapts to you just going for a walk. But if you go for a walk and then you go into a jog, and then you come to a set of stairs and you run up and down those stairs, your system will adapt to that explosive power phase of going up the stairs. Now, regarding martial arts training in general and boxing training, that's explosive power. So, you know, depending on how many rounds someone's doing, you say you go up to 5 rounds, that's all mainly explosive power. There's a bit of cardio involved, but a lot of that's your androgen triphosphate levels in the body. Anyway, enough of that at the moment. So in this workout, your focus really is on more enduro rather than explosive power. So you've got, the reps are all very high, relatively speaking, if you're comparing that to, say, bodybuilding or Olympic weightlifting or something, because the objectives are different. And at the end of the day, it's always horses for courses in everything that you do. You don't put a horse that can run the Melbourne Cup, which is a long distance race. You don't put the sprinters in the Melbourne Cup. They'll never win it. They'll peter out after a couple of laps because they're not built for it. Right, so that's the illustration. Anyway, if you want to go into more detail, go onto healyshealth.com, and I've explained that in the educational sections of that website. Okay, so this is my workout once a week, and once a week can quite often be enough, especially when you're doing, you know, 2 to 3 martial arts sessions a week on top of this. Okay, so 20-minute stepper, warms up the quads and glutes. Leg curl machine, only 10 kilo plate, 24 reps. That's sort of the endurance part. In other words, you do it until they burn. Stiff-legged deadlifts with an Olympic bar with a couple of 10 kilos on. This is my personal one. You might need 10. With stiff-legged deadlifts, I wouldn't go over, I don't care what strength athlete you are, no more than 1 Olympic plate either side, because you've got a lot of stress, like you've got a lot of forward flexion stress on the intervertebral disc when you're going forward. So if you take it relatively lightweight, do 2 sets of 12 to stretch the hamstrings out. Very important. Sumo wide leg squats, again, a lightweight, 2 by 5 kilo plates, 2 by 12 reps. Again, your focus is the adductors. So the adductors and the gracilis muscle, which is a very thin muscle that goes from the groin to the inside of the leg to the knee. And I'll explain that later down in the diagrams. The focus of increasing your stretching ability is also increasing the strength of these smaller muscles that are involved or limit your forward flexion, or your, say your forward split or your side split, right? Nautilus lower back machine, 13 plates on the stack, isolate erector spinae lower back group. Now, not many people have the Nautilus lower back machine. I've used to own a Nautilus gym, so I've still got some of the Nautilus equipment now. You may be able to find one of these, maybe a nitro version or one of the later versions. I've got generation 2 and also got generation 1, but the lower back, the Nautilus in particular, biomechanically perfect. The other brand that is made by the same company is Hammer Strength. So if you get a Hammer Strength lower back machine, hopefully they make one. I imagine they would. It's basically the same thing, but you put the plates on yourself rather than having a plate stack. So what that does is isolate the erector spinae group, your lower back, without any compression. Now, you have a lot of characters going around, saying how good squats are and all this. Yeah, that's true if you wear a belt, and if you're not loading up those plates across your back, so that the compression, an L1 to 5, doesn't start to create real issues in your lower back. And the trouble is that when a lot of the what I call extreme strength athletes, and of course a lot of them are on drugs, as you know, but even on drugs it doesn't matter, that just makes them stronger, doesn't make their bones any stronger, I suppose. But what happens is that they wind up blowing discs everywhere. And when you blow a disc, and I can explain that to you maybe in another video, but basically the nucleus pulposus of the disc is the intervertebral disc in between your as your spine goes down the column. It's got these discs which basically look like washers, and they look like, when you look at them from a cross section, they look like a cut cross section of a tree, where they've got rings that go round and round and round, and these rings are like fibrous material made of like a tendinous or a ligament type material, and in the middle it's got a fluid like paste called the nucleus pulposus. Now what'll happen if you load these discs up too much, what'll happen, that nucleus pulposus, which looks like toothpaste actually, it will bridge through those outside rings and then push out into the nerves. So that's when you get someone says, "Oh, I've blown a disc." Well, what's happened is that nucleus pulposus has found its way out through a crack in the rings around it to the external part of the spine, and of course that's where your nerve extractions go out. So I can go into that in more detail, but that's just a little bit of an idea. Okay, so then we go to the Nautilus torso twist machine, 20 plates on that machine, 2 sets of 12 either side. So it's only one set, but you've gone to stepper, you've gone to leg curls, stiff legged deadlifts, you're doing the hamstrings, sumo squats, you're doing focus on abductors and the gracilis muscle. Nautilus lower back machine, you've isolated the lower back, erector spinae. Nautilus torso twist, and of course that's the obliques and the abdominals. Hanging leg raise with your body weight, 2 by sets of 12. I use straps to secure my hands because the focus is the abdominals. And the tip with this, a hanging leg raise, is not about lifting your knees, it's about turning your hips up. So when you do this hanging leg raise, when you actually turn the hip up, that's when the abdominals engage, right? So that one there may require some personalised instruction. Then after that, we go down to do lying abductor leg flies with leg weights. So that's like reverse splits lying on the ground, 50 to 200 reps. Well, with leg weights you won't be doing that, I'll tell you. Or 2 sets of 30 with leg weights. And the leg weights, you can just pick them up from Kmart, either 1 kilo or 2 kilo, or even just use work boots. So you lie on the floor, put your hands beneath the glute muscles, and then you're doing splits, like split, open, close, open, close, open, close. And the idea is to get to that burn point. And the burn point with ankle weights or leg weights on, usually 30 reps will pull you up. So I use 2 kilo leg weights, and the first few weeks I was doing this, I was sore for days afterwards, so just be careful there. Now, lunges with body weight, 15 to 20 reps each leg, 2 sets to emphasise the stretch of the support leg, which equals hip flexor stretch as much as possible. So you're doing lunges, but you're doing lunges with the body completely upright. Don't lean forward. You see a lot of people doing lunges and leaning forward. Will actually take the stress off the hip flexor or the iliopsoas muscle. You'll see all this below. I'll explain where those muscles start and finish. So when you do lunges, you don't have to do really full, you don't have to do the complete full range of motion, because you're just easing into this. You're just getting the reflex action used to going deeper and deeper and deeper. So what I do is 15 to 20 reps on each leg, and then I do 2 sets. Then I've got lunges. I've left this one off. I do side lunges as well, or side kick lunges, same thing, 15 to 20 reps, and it's like a side kick stretch, so I forgot to put that one in. That's no worries. Then you go through your regular, I call it the Jun22 stretches, or the martial arts stretching, or whatever martial art you're doing, whatever system you've got, and you go through that. Emphasize the butterfly stretches. Use a towel to get the opposite isometric, antagonistic, and agonistic and antagonistic effect. You know, the opposite, the same muscle and the opposite muscle. The small, gentle bouncing movements to trick the gogai, or goggly eye I'd call them, but gogai receptors into relaxing more, and ultimately working towards the full splits or full side splits, what I call the Van Damme splits. There's Van Damme up there. Okay, we all remember Bloodsport. That was one of his best movies. A good bloke, Van Damme, actually. Now, regarding these videos that I do with the education material, they're not for resale, and every quote, especially the anatomy and physiology references I give you here, they're actually textbooks, so you're recommended to purchase those textbooks. And as I say, the whole objective here is just to educate you and motivate you, not make money by selling anything to do with these, okay? And likewise, I advise people you don't print these out. Only people that should be watching this is our members. You can print these out for education purposes, but you don't print them out to resell, load on a website, all that sort of stuff, right? Notes: the strength of the abductors are extremely important, as they are often weak and underused. If we strengthen them by high rep work, the kick will become easier to execute and hold the position statically. Also, stage by stage slow motion kicks, holding at transition points and pausing, is key to executing all perfect complete kicks. Break it down, put it back together. It's all in the detail. Okay, so what I'm saying there is, including using the 2 kilo, 1 kilo work boots as you're doing these, to build up the isometric and the static strength of being able to execute kicks properly. Because when you do kicks, it's not just the main body of the muscle that you're using. You're actually using the connective part of that muscle, the tendon connection, and the tendon goes from muscle to bone, and that's what's got the receptors in there. So it's a very tricky, let's say, it's a very tricky scenario to be able to pull all this together without seeing the big picture. Fortunately, after 50 years of training in boxing and martial arts, I sort of struggled through this myself. And as I've said in the other videos, I've done 6 years of medical science and focused on chiropractic and radiography and what have you. So it gives me a greater depth of understanding to be able to teach others what all this means and how to pull it all together. Because unlike others that went to the university with me, I was like the oldest student there, but the rest of them just didn't have any experience in anything physical much at all. It was pretty worrying actually, but anyway, it won't go there. Again, this is on the other video. As you can see, this is the neuro connectors, and as you can see, there's a tendon, muscle to tendon that goes to bone. Now you've got your motor neurons, your sensory neurons, the Golgi tendon organ, that's sitting right there in the tendon, right? So that tendon gets overstretched, zoomp, sends a message into the one of the thalamic tracts in this is the spine, a cross section of the spine, goes straight up to the central nervous system or the brain, and then shoots back. So there's a circuit going on all the time of sensory neuro feedback to your brain. And as I've said in these other videos, that if you're stretching and you close your eyes, you suddenly start to stretch more than you would with your eyes open. You think, well, why is that? And the answer is that you've cut off the visual perception of what you're doing, and the brain just has to operate on these senses. Right? There's a lot more in it, but I won't go into a full anatomy and physiological tutorial here. So, as you can see, each muscle, sensory neuron, just what I've said there. Basically, I've said the whole thing there. Now, when you're stretching, people say, look, I'm not flexible, I'm not born like that, I'm that and this and that and everything else. Look, there are some people who are naturally flexible. When they're younger, these tendon to bone have been stretched. Maybe they're doing gymnastics or something. But when we get older, that doesn't change much. Like, I'm 67, so this is not going to change much for me or you, but the muscle is what we can work on. So we can strengthen and stretch that, and that's all part of the whole system. And here's a little thing to remember. If you were to go into a hospital and undergo anaesthetic, not suggesting that you do, but if you did, and suddenly you're out to it and you're under anaesthetic, your muscles can stretch up to 130% more than they can now. Alright? So what that means is when you take away all these receptors, which anaesthetic does, the muscle just relaxes. So the muscle can stretch up to 130% more than of its normal length. Now when you do these front splits, side splits, all the Van Damme splits as I call them, you probably go 108, 110 at the max. So you're nowhere going near the limit, the stress limit of those muscles and tendons. So it's an interesting fact that, that's quite an interesting thing to remember. Bear that in mind. Alright, now as we have a look at the actual muscle itself, it's just a bit of a repeat of the anatomy and physiology. If you want to refer to this, you go to the Anatomy and Physiology book by Totora, page 553, which is one of my reference books from university. Okay. Now that's just self-explanatory. It just explains you how that muscle actually operates. To the central nervous system, from the central nervous system, their mitochondria there that I was talking about. There's your Golgi tendon, sitting there, and it's sensing the stretch and the movement of that whole procedure there. Okay, so you can read that yourself. No sense, I've already elaborated on that. Now this is the erector spinae group. Now when people talk about the erector spinae group, there's about 9 or 10 straps of muscles. I think there's about 10. I mean, there's a whole stack of them, but you know, the overarching name for it is the erector spinae. So you can imagine you've got L1 here to L5 down here, and it goes back into the pelvis, and all this stretches through the rib cage and intertwines on the rib cage, intertwines all on the TPs of your spine, which is the transverse processes of the spine, interlocks through the lot. Now, if you're doing stiff-legged deadlifts, or you're doing our sort of stretching, or martial arts stretching, or hyperbolic stretching, you name it, this, stretching these essential muscles here properly, especially the hip girdle, which I haven't got the whole diagram there, you'll see some coming up, is critical. Because most people today, as I said in the other video, most people today have got office jobs and they're sitting on their butt for 8 hours a day. Now, I can tell you that from doing 6 years of university studies and sitting on your butt doing the assignments till all hours of the night is the worst thing that you can possibly do for your health and for your postural alignment. It's incredibly, the only word I can say for it's painful. I went up with backaches, all sorts of stuff, and I do stretching. So heaven help people who don't. So what happens is that when you're in, say you're in a seated position, your back is under about, I think it's about 13 times, lower back is under 13 times more stress than if you're standing. I remember a chiropractic mate of mine who run a very successful practice. I remember asking him once, I suppose, you know, your back herniations and what have you, basically from labourers or footballers or something, I suppose. He said, no, office workers. I almost fell off my chair. I said, why? He said, well, he said, number one, their lower back and the erector spinae is usually fairly weak from sitting in a chair all day. And where they do the injury is they pick something up, say some files to go to the filing cabinet, and they twist their body. And that twisting their body is what herniates the disc. So it doesn't have to be a heavy weight. So that lesson out of that is be very careful twisting with weight. So, you know, unless you've actually done all these exercises that I'm talking about, if you're just starting off and you think, oh no, I'll twist over here and pick this weight up in a twisted position, I said, well, you're a candidate for having radiating pain down the back of the sciatica nerve as the nerve gets impinged. So don't do that. And if you do that and wind up with an impinged nerve, give me a ring, because I run my business is musculoskeletal, and I've got distraction machines and all sorts of stuff to help people out, and I help a lot of the students out accordingly. And I use them myself, actually. Okay, so here's detail of the nerve structures. Looks pretty scary there, I know, but it's a biochemical reaction. So, you know, these are the synapses they've got there. So it's a bit like a spark plug. So you see all the positive and the negative ions here, they cut across the gap there, and it creates a current, literally. So you can, you know, I remember when we did neurology, we got all strapped up with the sensors on our brain and everything, and you know, things like you'd listen to rock music and the whole sensor, literally we did, the whole sensor on the computer graphs changed. So the state of mind in stretching is very, very important. You know, the relaxing, the breathing, you're meditating even, extremely important, because it directly affects this biochemical reaction. And I mean, you know, that's a little bit more detail than I'd like, but it gives you an idea. The electrical cabling that goes on throughout the brain and the body to the muscles and it's all electrochemical reactions across what they call synapses, and the charge goes across, and you've got the myelin sheaths and all this. It's quite interesting actually. And here's another little fun fact. Your electro-biochemical impulses in your nerves travel at 119 meters per second. 119 meters per second. That's fast. So anyway, now what I'm going to show you now is some of the anatomy and physiology. I've used the Skeletal Muscles by Stone & Stone. You can buy that on Amazon, and I've used these particular books for well over 20 years, maybe even 30 years, 20 years at least. I recommend that you, if you've got any interest in this, to get the detail, go and buy these books. Recommended. And as I say, all this material is educational, so we're not about selling stuff. Okay, these are the main hip flexors. Okay, so first of all, you've got I'll just move this over here. You've got your psoas major. Now that is a critical muscle which most people don't even know where it is, but it attaches from L1 right down to L4, possibly 5. It goes underneath the intestines, and then it hooks into the lesser trochanter of your femur. So it actually pulls your leg up. So for instance, you're doing a front kick and you lift your knee up. This is the main muscle that's operating. Now, that can be symptomatically problematic actually, because it cops a lot of stress, and guess where it's connected? It's connected to the lower back. So you can imagine, like people who do sit-ups with stiff, straight legs, they're really not doing much abs. They're really operating the hip flexor more than anything. So in our stretching, the hyperbolic stretching, the static stretching, the front-forward splits, all that, we're stretching this one out, which indirectly and directly assists the flexibility of the lower back. So very important. Over here is the piriformis. The piriformis muscle goes underneath your glute. This is frontwards, so you're looking at that skeleton, or the drawing of a skeleton from the anterior or the forward position. So this piriformis, there's always a lot of problems with people's piriformises, because out of the back of this comes your sciatica nerve. So the sciatica nerve has all its roots in here, and it goes through the piriformis and then drops down behind the back of the femur there. So when this actually is applied, you see where its attachment is at the top of the greater trochanter there at the top of the femur. It actually rotates the leg outwards. So the stretch for that is what we call the figure 4 stretch. Okay, now hamstrings, these are the main. The biceps femoris is probably the main one, but you've got the semitendinosus and the semimembranosus, which goes from here to here, there, like that. I haven't got that drawn in. I might have it down low, down the lower photos, I don't know. So you've got your semitendinosus, semimembranosus there, but this one is the main. This is the big boy here, the biceps femoris. So when you do stiff-legged deadlifts, you bend forward in that direction, and this, the ischial tuberosity, that's called, that goes up, and then it stretches this out. And when you have a look at where this connects, it's interesting. It actually connects on the there's your tibia and fibia on the side of the fibia. So that little bone on the outside of the leg, it attaches here and goes all the way through to here, attaches here at the femur, and right up to the ischial tuberosity there. Now we go over to here to one of the abductors, and it's called the gracialis, I think that's pronounced correctly. Now you can see it goes from the ischial tuberosity straight down behind the knee, wraps around, and then ties in just below the patella there on the tibia. Right, now this is a real weak muscle in most people because they never do anything to strengthen it, let alone stretch it. And it's critical because if you're doing the so-called Van Damme splits, this one is going to limit you tremendously. So all those suggestions I said up the top of the page about doing, you know, splits with leg weights, ankle weights tied to your legs and all this sort of stuff, this actually helps the strength of that particular muscle greatly. Right, now let's just move further down. Oh, here we go. Well, I've got the semitendinosus and semimembranosus. Remember when I mentioned them before, they're in the hamstring group. But you'll notice, like there's the ischial tuberosity, you'll notice where the semitendinosus, and the difference is membranosus, I always say tendinosus is the thinner one, membranosus is the thicker one, but sort of doesn't look like that in this diagram anyhow. It does on the anatomy charts. Now, notice where that attaches, and the tendon actually goes right beside the knee and drops down below the knee into the attachment here, just at the posterior part of the fibula. Right, now this is interesting because a lot of these muscles bridge the knee. So when you're doing, say, stiff-legged deadlifts, for instance, you're actually stretching those attachments around the knee. So people have knee problems. A lot of it's to do with these attachments tightening up and pulling against and compressing the, the femur to the fibula. So actually compressing the knee joint. Likewise, when you see over here with the semimembranosus, you see how that travels down, ischial tuberosity up there, it travels down and ties in below the knee. Again, you can imagine if this muscle was tightened up, where it would be pulling upwards against the knee and grinding it, you see. So we'll just go down a little bit further, and now we're getting to, this is the big kahuna here, is the glute maximus. So you see the glute maximus, it attaches to the sacrum there, and then goes in. That's the ITB band, iliotibial band, goes right down and attaches again below the knee. So when you see the gluteus maximus, you see it's the biggest and strongest muscle in the body, and then of course it attaches just near, around about here, on the hip, below the hip there, on the femur, and it pulls that bone, the femur, it pulls it backwards, right? And that is a critical muscle to build up with all this static stretching and what have you. Now below this area here we go over the glute medius, and I've got the glute maximus down there, down lower, but you can see this is, if you're going to do a kick out to the side, these muscles are critical and they must be strengthened and stretched. You will get trigger points in these, and as some people know that I've got a master's certification in dry needling as well, so even if you get trigger points here, I can really fix that up with the good old acupuncture needles, and it's very effective. But this area here really pulls on that femur and pulls it out. So adduction. So adduction is out. Adduction is in. Abduction is out. Now over here, this is the anterior part of the skeletal system again, and here's your rectus femoris. Now that's the main quad muscle. You see the bodybuilders with the big quads here. This is the quad muscle, right? So that actually attaches to you. Attaches right across the patella. Again, it then attaches just at the top part of the fibula. Yeah, tib and fib. So let me just get here's the femur. So we're going to the tibula, the thick one. Yeah, tibula here. So you can see again all these muscles are crossing and bridging across the knee joint. So if you've got tightness here, or you know the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, they bridge the knee, so tightness there is going to affect the knee joint. So there's a lot in this. So okay, we just move down a little bit further and we'll see we're getting towards the end of this. Okay, here's the abductors. Now these are the ones, along with the brachialis muscles I showed you up there, that was a thin one. Now this is from the posterior area, but the brachialis that I spoke about goes from here down and attaches in there. But you can this is from the anterior, or the back of the person, right? You can see the sacrum there. So these ones here pull the fibula in. So you can see here, if the glute medius was there, it's going to pull that out, sitting there, so it pulls in that direction. These ones stretch and pull it back in. So the abductor exercises with the ankle weights, these are going to strengthen and stretch and strengthen both these legs, and they're critical in the Van Dam splits, as we're talking about there. Now here's the abductor magnus, so you've got here adductor longus, adductor brevis, so these are layered, and then you've got the big one here that's got two big arms to it, basically, you know, and then this one doesn't bridge the knee gap, it sits just on top of the rear of the femur there. So when you just go through and have a look at this, you've got the Van Dam splits, which are the adductors, the front splits, hip flexors, side kicks, glute max and glute max, medium and minimum, the TFL. I didn't put the TFL, but it sits at the top of the tensor fasciae latae, that big strip of tissue that goes right down the side of your leg, on the outside of the leg. At the top of that, just below your hip, is the just remember a latae. It's tensor fasciae latae. You know, have a cup of coffee on the side of your hip, just remember it that way. Side kicks, front kicks, hip flexors, rec femoris, vastus lateralis, and vastus medialis obliquus. So vastus lateralis and medialis. Front leg raise, knee raise as above, rear leg raise, hamstrings and partial adductors, sorry. Understanding the science is very, very important. So there's Graham Healy, 6 years at university level med science. Now I've got some, this is what the muscles look as an anatomy chart. Now if you want to purchase this, I found when I was doing all my anatomy and physiology training, go to 3dmedical.com, and I suggest that if you're doing anything even looking towards professionalism, you purchase this program. I use it all the time when I'm treating patients or clients, so that we can determine where the muscles attach. So I've got, you know, the book by Stone and Stone. I've got the program by 4dmedical.com, and I've probably found they're the best of the best. Plus I use textbooks by my friend from Canada, Dr. Vizenak, but that's going in a bit deep for this video. Okay, so, you know, I just say here, just have a look at those particular diagrams. That's the posterior, the anterior, and try and identify those muscles that I broke down up top, so that you can see where they are. And the main thing is also look how they they cross across around the knee joint. So when you're doing all the stretching, you're releasing pressure on the knee, ankles, etc. Also releasing pressure on the lower back, quadriceps, sorry, not the quadriceps, the abdominal area, the upper body, the whole box and die. So that's the end of this video, and I hope that sort of helps. What I find is, as I've said in the other video, that after doing 6 years of this sort of training, and I could really do anything. I could do anything in the medical field, but I really, I'm qualified to do radiographic images and all this sort of stuff. If I wanted to be a radiography, I could, I suppose, but I don't really want to do that. I'm more interested in practical applications of the medical science through actually showing people what to do and educating them along the way. So my purpose as an instructor isn't just some sort of brain dead philosophy that's been buried for years and then trying to repeat the past or something. I'm about showing people why we actually do something to benefit that person. Now, regarding all this stretching, I'm sure, if you're doing our Jun22 martial arts training or the Healy's integrated self-defense system, I can give you an education along the way as to why and how you're doing stuff. But ultimately, people need, what I find, people need a system to be consistent. And if you're not consistent, you're not going to get the flexibility that you require, and even the flexibility just for daily living. I mean, getting up out of a chair, bending over and picking up something without doing your back, as silly as that sounds, that's where the majority of injuries occur. Remember I told you the story about my associate in chiropractic who most of his clients that had herniated discs were in the offices picking up the filing box and turning to the left and twisting their body, and bang, next minute they do the discs and they're in for 6 to 12 weeks of treatment. So I hope this helps. Any questions, please contact me through healyshealthandfitness.com. The stretching system, I believe, is a rehab system in itself. So I've trained a lot of people, as you can imagine, and I find that if people don't have a system to be turning up all the time, at least 2 to 3 times a week, they're not going to do anything really. They're just going to sit around, and if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And definitely with this, and I can tell you from personal experience, if you don't stretch regularly and systematically, everything starts to seize up, and the older you get, the worse it gets. So when you get to a certain point of flexibility and you're happy with that, well, you've got to maintain it, and then you start to enjoy it after a while. You think, well, gee, I feel pretty good, I'm going to keep this going. And I can remember reading the testimony of the guy who did the hyperbolic stretching education, and he was a computer programmer, and basically sat on his butt 24/7, and he wound up being crippled out of it. Like imagine you're sitting in a chair on the computer and aches and pains going on, and your system's like screaming out to be stretched out, and you never do it. And that's how he started the hyperbolic stretching. He said, no, blow this, I'm not going to put myself in a wheelchair. So he started doing exactly what I'm saying to you here, and he become, super flexible, from going from no flexibility at all to being able to do the Van Damme splits and all that sort of stuff. Now, doing the Van Damme splits, that's great, and doing the forward splits, that's great, but it is all this process in between. If your objective is not to do the Van Damme splits, that's great. Maybe you can do half that or 3/4 that without doing yourself an injury. That's an achievement in itself. So the object of all these videos is not to turn someone into another Van Damme. There's only or Bruce Lee. That's an end goal, I suppose. But just from a normal health and fitness point of view, is to make your body more usable for you, to keep it fluid and to keep it intact. There's a few other things you can do with nutrition and that, but I won't go into it in this particular one. Glucosamine and things like that to keep the joints up to date, especially as you get older. But I hope that helps. Graham Healy over and out, and thank you very much for listening.